Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Singapore and good morning to those joining us from Europe. My name is Justyna Lasik and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. On behalf of the Economic and Trade Section and Delegation of the European Union to Singapore, I would like to warmly welcome you all to today's webinar on customs, trade facilitation and rules of origin. This is the latest in a series of outreach webinars on the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, which has now been in place for 18 months. Before we begin, let me make several housekeeping announcements. The webinar is being recorded. The recording, together with the presentations of our speakers, will be made available on the EU delegation website and our YouTube channel. All those who registered for the webinar will also receive an email with the respective links. We would like to encourage you to post your questions during the webinar and take this opportunity to actively interact with our experts. Please use the Q&A tab in the Zoom toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. With our expert panelists today, we will be exploring three topics. We will start with rules of origin under the EU-Singapore FTA and beyond, and look into the benefits and challenges for business. Then we will examine how trade facilitation and customs provisions can help businesses. Finally, we'll discuss in more detail the concept of authorized economic operators and how it facilitates bilateral trade. Now, it is my honor to invite the European Union Ambassador to Singapore, Her Excellency Barbara Plinkert, to deliver today's opening address. Ambassador Plinkert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Justyna. Ladies and gentlemen, speakers and participants from Europe and from Singapore, a very good afternoon from Singapore and good morning to those joining us from Europe. And welcome to all of you to today's webinar on customs, trade facilitation and rules of origin in the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. This webinar is organized by the EU delegation to Singapore. And as Justyna just said, it's part of a series of outreach activities on the EU-Singapore FTA with the support of the Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry, Customs, Enterprise Singapore, the Singapore Business Federation and Eurochamp Singapore. And I'm really very grateful to all of them for the collaboration in realizing this event. So I'm particularly pleased to see so many companies and relevant stakeholders connected from Singapore and from the EU interested to further explore the benefits and opportunities under the EU-Singapore FTA, which came into force in November 2019. So it's still a very young FTA. The EU and Singapore are solid trade and investment partners, and our combined annual bilateral trade in goods and services is valued at approximately 100 billion euro, positioning Singapore as the EU's largest trade partner in Southeast Asia. Singapore is also the EU's top destination for foreign direct investment in the Asean region. At the end of 2020, EU FDI stocks held in Singapore reached 222 billion euro. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has heavily hit international trade, and unfortunately, EU-Singapore merchandise trade flows have also not been spared. So this means that EU-Singapore trade in goods reached 41 billion euro in 2020, which is a decrease by 12.6% compared to 2019. But it's important to note that despite the negative effects of the pandemic on trade and global supply chains, the EU and Singapore at G20 and at WTO level committed to ensure the flow of vital medical supplies, critical agricultural products and other goods and services across borders, and to work to resolve disruptions to global supply chains, even as early as March 2020, when the pandemic just started. Enhanced customs cooperation has been essential during the pandemic to ensure a smooth clearance and transit of goods, including the seizure of counterfeit and pirated goods. So the EU's openness to trade has been particularly visible in the export of vaccines to the rest of the world, with already over 200 million doses that have been exported, including to Singapore, which is one of the main recipients in Asia, actually. Open, free and fair trade are key principles of the EU's trade policy, together with a strong commitment to a multilateral, rules-based international order. Together with like-minded countries such as Singapore, we are, for example, engaged in reforming the WTO to make it more efficient and capable of addressing the needs of future global trade. The EU also ratified and implemented the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement already in 2015, aiming at improving trade efficiency worldwide. By cutting red tape at borders, we can increase transparency and take advantage of technologies resulting in new business and trade opportunities, which will foster economic growth and the creation of jobs. So I'd also like to say a few words on our region-to-region relations between the EU and ASEAN, as they are also relevant for today's discussions. The EU has been and continues to be a strong supporter of the ASEAN integration process, and in particular, the establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community. Among many initiatives, the online ASEAN Customs Transit System, which was launched in December 2020, has been developed with the support of the EU under the ARISE Plus program. This system simplifies the movement of goods across the region to make it more efficient and cost-effective. At bilateral level, the landmark EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement provides preferential market access conditions for trade in goods by eliminating tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and for trade in services. The agreement also includes far-reaching provisions on other trade-related topics, which include intellectual property rights, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, government procurement, trade and sustainable development, as well as on customs, trade facilitation, and rules of origin, which is actually today's topic of discussion. So I'm pleased to have with us today an impressive lineup of speakers and experts from the Singapore Customs, the Directorates General of Trade and Customs of the European Commission, and PwC, who will guide us through the different customs-related provisions of the agreement, which are relevant for your daily business operations. They will touch upon key aspects of these provisions, such as how to benefit from trade preferences provided under the FTA, and how trade facilitating measures and customs provisions can help to increase trade flows. They will also explain concepts such as ASEAN accumulation and authorized economic operators. So I can only hope that this webinar will help many of you to understand better what are the benefits of the FTA for your businesses and how you can tap into them, how you can utilize the FTA for your business. So please use this opportunity to fully to ask your questions to the experts that are lined up here today. And I can only wish you now a very fruitful exchange in the course of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Klinkert. This sets perfectly the scene for our webinar. Now, before we get into the presentation, let's take a look first at what some of you told us in the 2 polls we ran before the opening. Let's bring up those results now. So we have asked you the following questions. Have you exported or imported goods using trade preferences under the EU-Singapore FTA? And the second one was what has been your experience with customs procedures in the EU or Singapore? As you can see, we have collected some responses, and they vary among the 4 options that you could choose. So definitely the answer number 3, I'm not familiar with the procedures and benefits from tariffs preferences under the EU-Singapore FTA, is the most frequently replied one in to question 1. And when it comes to the second question, it seems that the relevant information on customs procedure is not easy to find. So given those replies, I think the topic of our seminar is perfect, because our experts that will kindly agreed to join us today will provide some insights into those questions. So we hope at the end of this webinar, you will find all the necessary information in one place. So now let us move to the first session, which will focus on rules of origin. We will have 3 presentations as part of this session. The first from the European Commission is by Christophe Fontaine from Directorate General for Taxation and Customs Union, and Mariana Molnar from Directorate General for Trade. Second, we will hear from Gregory Leong, Deputy Head for Tariffs and Trade Services at Singapore Customs. And finally, we'll have a chance to listen to an external perspective on the topic from Frank Debets, Managing Partner for Customs and International Trade and PricewaterhouseCoopers Singapore. Christophe and Mariana, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Justina. Good afternoon to all of you. We will then present the rules of origin of the EU-Singapore FTA, which is a very broad domain, and we have only 9 minutes. So obviously we will not provide all the details. If you have questions, you will ask them during the Q&A session afterwards. The first thing you would have to ask yourself is it relevant to claim the benefit of the tariff preference of the agreement? And for doing this, you will need first to determine the classification of your product. And this is made using the harmonized system classification. Then, depending of the duty rate applicable for that product, you will determine if it's relevant to apply for the tariff preference or not. Because using an FTA and the preference has also a cost. You have to keep the documents and sometimes adapt also the production process to satisfy the rules and so on. So it has a cost and it's not always relevant. But if it is relevant, it brings much value. Obviously, if the MFN duty rate is 0%, that there is no interest for the importer to claim the benefit of the preference. In the EU, we have a database which is called Tariffs, which gives all measures relating to EU customs tariff, commercial and agricultural legislation. If you can see the link, if you go there, you can find for all products, in the next slide, you can find for all products the duty rate applicable and the corresponding legislation. For instance, here we've taken the example of canned pork, luncheon meat. You can see that the MFN duty rate will be 85.7 euros per 100 kilos. But there is a tariff preference for Singapore, which is 57.13 euro per 100 kilos. And you see the reference to the legislation on the right, which is a decision 1875 of 2019. That's the FTA itself. But then at the line below, you see that it is associated to a quota, and you see the reference to the legislation establishing the quota. We will see that afterwards. So specifically in that case, you see it is relevant to use the FTA. Now, what should you do to benefit from the tariff preference of an FTA? There are 3 conditions. The first one is that your goods obviously are originating in a party, in Singapore or in the EU. That the goods are transported from the exporting party to the importing party, respecting the transport provision. And then that the origin is properly certified. We will see all those elements afterwards. So if those conditions are respected, then you may benefit from the FTA. First, determination of the origin. Goods will be considered as originating in Singapore or the EU if they are wholly obtained. There is a specific article dealing with this. Or if they are sufficiently processed. So you may use materials imported from abroad, and if they are sufficiently processed, then your final product will acquire the origin of Singapore or the EU. The list of specific operations to be done on the depending of the final product are laid down in 2 annexes. The first one is Annex B, that's the product specific rules. For all products produced in the EU or in Singapore. And there is an Annex BA, which gives more flexible rules for certain products originating in Singapore. And for those products, there is a quota. There is also a notion of insufficient operations. So if the processing does not go beyond a list of insufficient operations, the origin will not be acquired. And you may find those insufficient operations in Article 6. Now, if we look to Annex BA for the quotas, we take an example here for the curry fish bowls. You see that the rule for in Annex B, that's for Chapter 16, is manufacture in which all the materials of Chapter 2, 3, and 16 used are wholly obtained. So there is a strict conditions that the input to produce the fish bowls are wholly obtained. If you look to Annex BA, the more flexible rule is manufacture from materials of any heading except that of the product. It's a change of tariff classification, which means you may import the input and produce the curry fish bowls. And there is a quota of 400 tons per year. associated to that product. We have in the EU a specific legislation establishing that quota. It's a legislation of 2019-1927, and in that legislation you will find the first column gives what we call the order number. That's the identification number for the quota. At import in the EU, if an importer would like to use a quota, it has to indicate that specific order number in the import declaration. The principle is first come, first served. As long as the quota is available, it may be used. There is a database which is called Quota in the EU, which may be consulted to find the availability on the different quotas of depending on the specific destinations. You see here for Singapore, we have 3 quotas, 3 order numbers. And if you click on it, I have no slide for that, but if you click on it, you will see the details of the availability, what has been consumed and what is still available. So I said the first element is the goods have to be originating. The second one is that the transport provision has to be respected. I will not go into the details, just mentioning that storing goods in a country of transit and splitting the consignments in the country of transit is possible according to that FTA, which is very convenient if the exporters want to use hubs when exporting to the importing party. And the third element was that the origin is properly certified. It's made by means of an origin declaration. You see the text here. So it's a simple sentence which the exporter has to indicate on a commercial document, which is most of the time an invoice, maybe a delivery note, a packing list. In that origin declaration, the economic operator, the exporter, has to indicate an identification number, which is in the EU an approved exporter number. In Singapore, it is the unique entity number. So in the EU, it's the approved exporter number. Well, some details about that system. I see I'm running out of time, so I will not provide all the details, just to mention that there is no online availability of those numbers. Let's say if there is a doubt on the number, either by the importer using the origin declaration or by the customs authorities in Singapore, the only way to verify the approved exporter number will be to request the verification to the member state in the EU, which has approved that exporter. What is communicated from the EU to Singapore is the structure of those numbers. And this may be verified by the customs authorities and not by the importer, but only by the customs authorities. There is a guidance document that you may find useful concerning this approved exporter number. And now I will pass the floor to my colleague Mariana to explain access to market.
Thank you, Christophe. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me shortly introduce you the new information portal of the European Commission, which is called Access to Markets. The portal was launched autumn last year. The driving force behind creating this portal was basically the need for better access to information. As you have seen from Christophe's presentation, and as you will see from the coming presentations today, the information and data contained in the FTAs is enormous. This is not always obvious, particularly to small economic operators, where to find that information or what kind of information to look for at all. Or, for example, if they find the relevant information, how to make use of that information, what to do with it, how to turn it to their benefits, and how to make sure that they can benefit from the preferences provided under the FTA. The idea was to help economic operators in accessing the proper information in a structured way and to create a one-stop shop, which would centralize all the necessary pieces of data for them. The access to market database is organized on a country-by-country basis. And Singapore has a dedicated place within this structure. This place for Singapore provides for static information on the various chapters of the FTA, including static descriptive information on rules of origin. This also provides links, for example, to the legal texts and further explanation. What will be available in the future is an interactive tool on rules of origin. This is already working for several FTAs, and Singapore is in the pipeline to be included in this interactive tool, which we think will be even more detailed help for economic operators. I would like to invite you to consult the Access to Markets database. The link will be provided to you in the deck of presentations, which you will receive after the today's session. So indeed, this is the slide where you can see the information provided in a static way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. I would like to remind you that you can submit questions via the Q&A button in the lower part of the screen. Now I will invite Gregory to take the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, to everyone in Singapore, and good morning to everyone in Europe. My name is Gregory Leong. I'm from the Tariffs and Trade Services branch in Singapore Customs. What services that my branch provide are to provide rules of origin for preferential tariff treatment under the various free trade agreements, and for free trade agreements involving the issuance of preferential certificates of origin. Singapore Customs is the preferential certificate of origin issuing authority. Okay. In this slide, I'm going to talk about the following subjects. First, I'm going to provide a recap of what products qualify for preferential tariff under the EUSFTA, which will include definition of the concept of originating products and where businesses can find the product-specific rules or rules of origin for applicable on each specific product. Next, I'm going to talk about the key features of the EUSFTA, which includes selected trade facilitative features and a summary of the self-certification process under the EUSFTA. Finally, we're going to conclude with a snapshot of making claims for preferential tariff in Singapore. Okay, this slide shows the definition of the concept of originating products as found in Article 2 of Protocol 1 of the EUSFTA. Origin here is defined as the nationality of product either in Article 4 or in Article 5, read with Article 6 of the Protocol 1 of EUSFTA. So the keywords to take note here are wholly obtained, as in example of live animals born and raised there, or plants and vegetable products grown or harvested there. And the next keywords to take note of for non-wholly obtained products like processed food, machineries, vehicles are sufficiently worked or processed. So in this slide, we will discuss what is sufficiently worked or processed. What this term means is that the work or process carried out on the non-originating materials have to meet the rules of origin stated in Annex B or Annex BA of the Protocol 1 of the EUSFTA. In short, the non-originating materials must have undergone sufficient transformation in the process of becoming a new product. So basically, there are three approaches to substantial transformation listed here, and they are value-added, change in tariff classification, and specific rules. I've added an example to each of the approach, and participants may wish to read further as shown in the slide. For Singapore companies, I would like to highlight that under ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, ATIGA, whom many of us in this region are familiar with, there is no general rule in the EUSFTA. What this means is that in the context of ATIGA, we have a 40% RVC applicable to all ASEAN originating goods, which we term as a general rule. But no such general rule exists in the EUSFTA. So one has to read the PSR or the ROO stated in Annex B or BA to find out. Lastly, okay. Next, this is a slide. Here is a slide on the on the ASEAN food product, I tried to combine the two Annex B and BA together. So just to illustrate, under HS Code Chapter 16, there is a rules origin for a more liberal rules origin for ASEAN food products under BA, whereas the norm or under the PSR is in Annex B. You need to manufacture the products from chapters as shown in the slide. Okay, next. Yeah. Okay. So in this slide, I'll talk about where companies can find the information about PSRs and rules or PSRs rules origin. Okay. So the rules origin are actually found in the legal text, which I will share in my resource slide at the end of this presentation. And companies are urged to read the full text. For Singapore originating exporters, just a reminder, please read Annex 2A, Elimination of Customs Duty, and Annex 2A2 of Tariff Schedule of the Union to find out what are the appropriate EU preferential tariff rates. And to confirm understanding, Singapore companies can use Enterprise Singapore's tariff finding rule. Okay. Now I move on to the key features of the EUSFTA. Similar to other FTAs, the parties to the EUSFTA are treated as a single production area. The accumulation provision in Article 3 allows for originating materials from EU member state or Singapore to to meet the PSR for the specific product in either Annex B or Annex BA, provided that the working or processing goes beyond the minimum ops or list of insufficient operations. So for Singapore producers here, for producers, it's important to note that if your material is made in Singapore and meets the rules of origin, please have in hand invoice from your material supplier or your material manufacturer's declaration. Because in case of overseas customs verification or during Singapore customs audit, we will want to cite these documents. Similarly, if your material originates from the EU, please possess the origin declaration issued by approved exporter. Okay, now we go on to accumulation, ASEAN accumulation. I think I will just quickly go through this because it has been covered earlier. So of one point to note is that the relevant parties have to put in place proper administrative cooperation and obligations to ensure that such immediate materials and goods are indeed ASEAN originating and not from other countries before before companies can utilize the ASEAN accumulation clause. So there's potential for ASEAN accumulation clause enshrined inside the EUSFTA. Okay. On principle of territory and non-alteration, I think this has been covered in the earlier slides also. So I will not go on to it. Yeah. Now I'm going to talk about other selected trade facilitative measures. I found 4 in Protocol 1, but there are many others that are not highlighted here. So companies can take a look at these 4 and the other features in the protocol. Okay. Next. Okay. A key tool to prove the status of a good is the origin declaration. So under EUSFTA is a self-declaration or self-certification by the exporter. So here, I believe that this legal text is familiar to all of us. What I want to point out or remind everyone is that the text here is mandatory and it's not indicative. Yeah. So what this means is that the text that appears on the selected document has to be word for word as shown in the legal text. This will enable a smoother process of submission to the importing countries, customs authorities. Thanks. This slide shows the relevant provisions in relation to the making of the origin declarations. Please note that under Article 20, the importer shall submit the origin declaration to the customs authority of the importing party in accordance with the procedures applicable in that party. Here, I would like to urge companies to comply with the laws and regulations of the importing party as well as the exporting party. Okay. Next. Okay, here is a quick summary of the benefits of EUSFTA. As said earlier, this list is not exhaustive. And why these four happen to be here is because they were mentioned earlier in my presentation. So the first benefit that companies enjoy if you utilize EUSFTA is that companies can issue their own origin declaration subjected to the fulfilling of the PSR, product specific rule for that product, and the conditions of making out an origin declaration in Article 17 and 18 of Protocol 1. So what this means is that there's no need for companies to go to the certificate issuing authority to obtain a preferential certificate origin. The origin declaration is sufficient proof of origin for that product and for preferential tariff claim submission purposes. So there are three other benefits listed here, which is self-explanatory. Okay, this is a summary of the self-certifying process under EUSFTA. You can start from, we move from the left to the right. So first you determine the HS classification, then you check the tariff concession, check if the product meets the rules of origin, and then ensure the product meets any additional conditions specified. And then in the Singapore context, exporters with UEN, unique exporters, unique entry entity numbers, prepare the origin declaration and be prepared to submit other documents when asked. So finally, after you submitted the documents, make sure you maintain proper records. Okay. Before I conclude my presentation, I would like to provide 2 slides on the making of claims for preferential tariff in Singapore. The key points to note here are that excise duty elimination and its reduction are not part of the EUSFTA, and excise duty continue to be payable on all originating goods at their respective rates. So, as in EUSFTA and in any of FTAs, only customs duty are eliminated, as shown in Article 2.6. Okay, this I provide. Okay. Sorry. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah. The whole thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. What this slide is showing is that what types of duties are levied on durable goods when they are imported into Singapore. You have the CIF value of the product. You plus add the customs duty plus the sales tax or value added tax. Or in Singapore context, we call it goods and services tax, GST plus excise duty equals the value of the goods. So what FTA does is that it eliminates the part on customs duty, because excise duty under the definition of the Customs Act, it means duty on goods whether manufactured in Singapore or elsewhere. So even if the product is not from a FTA country, they still have to pay the excise duty. Even if it's from an FTA duty, they still have to pay the excise duty. What it saves is on the customs duty. Okay, I've come to the end of my last slide. So what I did is I put together the resources available to help businesses to understand the rules of origin in EUSFTA better, and to increase its utilization. So there are hyperlinks here, and companies may wish to click on these things to find out more. I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gregory. As mentioned before, we'll share all the slides, so you will be able to check the links from the documents we'll provide you with. So now we are moving to the next presentation, and we will have the pleasure to hear Frank, who will explain the business point of view and assessment of the FTA from third-party perspective. Frank, over to you.
Thank you very much, Justina, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody, maybe even good evening if you have an audience in the US. Yeah, I'm very happy to get a chance to talk a little bit about the industry perspective. I think compared to the previous speakers who were clearly focusing on explaining how companies might benefit from and how they should use the FTA, with a particular focus on the rules of origin, which is what we're talking about in this section, I guess my presentation is a little bit wider. In my audience, I would speak to both the companies, but also the regulators, the authorities, as to evaluate, well, what do I see happen in the market? What are some of the pressure points? Why are some companies maybe not using all those fantastic benefits from the FTAs that are out there. And I saw from the poll that we have about half of our audience that was unfamiliar, they said, with the procedures and the process of the EU-Singapore FTA, which to me suggests that they're unfamiliar with FTAs altogether, because the EU-Singapore FTA broadly is very similar to other FTAs in its rules and its processes. And then we saw in the second question that at least those that were familiar, quite a few of them were saying, well, we think the rules are cumbersome and it's a bit hard to find them. So kind of let's dive into that. So what do we see in the public domain? And this is not just me, but this is everybody. Taking a snapshot of things that have been in the press and on TV and then in newspapers and wherever in the past year and a half. And generally, the message clearly is a very positive one, as you would expect around FTAs. There's great benefits, the simplifications, flexibility, much opportunity is out there. Yet at the same time, I always worry a little bit, right, that the figures, particularly aggregated figures, are pretty meaningless to an individual company. And so if you look at those figures as total trade, even trade expansion, we see some statistics, and it always reminds me when the US-Korea FTA was first ratified, there was some statistics about 3 years later to show that the trade between the US and Korea had grown by 80%, but actually the FTA wasn't in place. It hadn't been affected yet because there was a big delay. So it's not always due to the FTA that trade improves. Sometimes it's just a visibility, companies thinking, hey, maybe we should look at that market and realize that there's other opportunities there. So that is an example. So the headlines themselves, maybe they serve a public purpose and the profiling purpose, but for individual companies, they're not so meaningful. And what is even more important for companies is that when they look at the claims that are being made, or they look at the examples they see, and they then evaluate an FTA and they realize, well, it doesn't apply to us. It's not my reality. It makes them kind of switch off a little bit and perhaps never go back to an FTA, particularly if they don't realize if there is a staggered implementation. And so these are, despite the fact that the messages are out there, we also see a lot of commentary from the regulators, from the Ministry of Trade, from the EC delegation. Well, why are not more people doing something with this FTA? And what do they? What is holding them back? So if you look at that, I mean, when we looked at public domain, it's one message. But what do I hear from my clients? And what do they tell me? Now, they essentially tell me that, well, FTAs are nice and they're great to have, of course, but they don't necessarily drive my business strategy. And in many organizations, I, as an advisor, would say, well, maybe they should. But the reality is that there's many other business considerations, and often FTAs are an afterthought. And there are quite a few companies that are utilizing EUSFTA like other FTAs, but I think a lot of companies out there simply cannot meet the rules of origin, or they don't know how to demonstrate that, or they don't even know how to determine how to work all those fancy rules that are in the agreement that might seem simple to somebody who knows FTAs. Like in other cases, they just find it very hard to get the information they require. I think there's a big mismatch between the expectations that many of the authorities have as to how well companies are organized in terms of all the information and access to information that they need to determine origin and to determine whether they meet rules of origin versus what is really there in practice. Now, having said that, clearly companies come to me as an advisor only when they get into trouble. So maybe my view is a little bit skewed towards the companies that struggle with using FTAs, and there's plenty out there that are doing well that I simply don't know about. But I think when I talk in general in the market, not just to the companies that come to me with problems, you do see the same commentary coming up, and you saw that in the polls earlier on as well. And one of the areas that companies very often struggle with is say that the rules leave ambiguity on the treatment. I think the previous speakers clearly pulled out quite a few of the rules, and it sounds great when you look at it like that, and it sounds clear. But when you then, I mean, the agreement isn't hundreds of pages for no reason, and there's lots of exceptions, lots of details, and that's where a lot of companies might get unstuck. And I've given just some examples, some phrases of companies that have come to us and say, well, this is not clear. How do I do this? Like, how do I rely on a PCO? What do I do to use a manufacturing cost calculation? And that is not often very clear to those organizations. And so what do companies then struggle with? on the back of that? Well, it's a whole range of things. And we're focusing here on rules of origin. And as you can see, I'm not going to run through that whole list, but there's only, I guess, but there's only numbers 4, 5, and 6 are really direct related to the rules of origin. There's much else that is out there that companies might struggle with, knowing where to look, understanding the agreement, getting the documentation in place. But their typical questions are often broader than meeting a rule of origin. And they think, well, FTA, maybe I can get a duty suspension, then I don't have to worry about demonstrating FTA. Or maybe the benefit that the FTA offers is only marginal. But very often they come unstuck at any of those questions. And when it gets to rules of origin, they are more complex to apply in practice than it may seem from the standardized or the regular messaging that is out there in the guidance. And I often say, I mean, I had the discussion with Enterprise Singapore representatives here to say, well, if you really want to understand why companies struggle, go on a secondment for 3 months in a company that is trying to do this, and you see where the difficulties lie. Now, of course, that's not an excuse. Right? There is much more, I think, that companies can do to take FTAs seriously, to spend the time and the resources. Often I say, well, if you could save only $20,000, which for a lot of companies is not that much money on an annual basis, but it costs you $15,000 to hire somebody to do just that, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you put yourself in a position that you could benefit more? But the commercial reality is often a little bit different. And just to give some examples, I'll just look at 2 examples that hopefully make this come to life a little bit more. So on the left-hand side, example 1 is a company that I was working with that was struggling to determine value add. Right? And the EUSFTA, and I think Greg already mentioned this, it's a bit less specific than other ASEAN agreements that we're used to in Singapore. It's not very clear in how it spells out the calculation methodologies. What can I include? What can I not include in contributing content, qualifying content? And it's very hard to get that guidance. And if you match that then, or if you overlay that with the difficulties of companies to get access to the data they require, you can see why they might give up too quickly. And we have another example, and that's a more recent one, where a company was saying, well, okay, we've now done all the hard work. It's taken us 6 months to work out that we qualify, and we had to get all this data, and we've meeting the rules of origin. So we're going to start claiming preference. But hey, we've lost 6 months. And then they look at the agreement and they say, oh, there's a possibility to retrospectively claim benefit over those past 6 months. Actually, to do that in practice is very hard, if not impossible. Right? Many authorities around the EU will tell you, well, this is only for exceptional circumstances, not just because you weren't ready. Like, not being ready is not exceptional enough. The process varies in member state by member state. So if that company has been exporting to 5 different member states, they would need 5 different procedures, 5 different sets of documentation, etc. So there's just 2 examples, and I don't want to sound too negative and go on, but these examples make it clear that it's difficult. And often it is too difficult for companies to utilize the FTAs. So maybe trying to end on a positive note, so what can we all between us do to make that easier? And the companies that do struggle, and I think there are many, to make sure that the potential of the EUSFTA is being used as much as perhaps it was anticipated. I think we do still need more guidance. So these kind of sessions are great, but I think having some kind of system or call it informed compliance that they do in the US, something where we can talk about points of principle. If you pay a dutiable royalty, is that a content that can be included or excluded for value purposes? And we should make sure that all these questions that companies have, we take the points of principle and we share them with everybody else, because I certainly see the same questions come up over and over again. Right? And particularly the gray area or subjective areas. A legal text is very hard to read. And also, I think there's some good value in, particularly in Singapore, for companies that are looking to establish a business here or to grow their business here, but in their minds have, well, we're doing this because we want to benefit from the EUSFTA. They would like to know up front that they're doing this right, that they're setting their factory up right, that they're planning accordingly, so that they don't have a surprise when they're manufacturing and they're self-declaring origin. And suddenly they get challenged and say, well, you misinterpreted this rule, and therefore you're not entitled to the benefit. So I think those are some simple things that we can do to make it easier for companies, particularly also the smaller companies that don't have the resources to deal with all of this. And I think what we would see if we see more figures published, hopefully we would then see the FTA utilization rates go up. We have the information capability in Singapore by tracking using the preferential indicator field. And I think it should be easy enough to capture that information in the EU. I think it's captured by quite a few member states. So let me just stop there and pass it back to you, Justina.
Thank you very much for sharing your views. It was very insightful, and actually, as you know, we are probably aware of majority of the points. EU and Singapore both concluded a number of FTAs, and basically, I think the main struggle is that many of the rules that we negotiated in various FTAs are not exactly the same. So in terms of rules of origin, it's not only about compliance with one set of rules, but also multiple sets of rules for various FTAs that you might be using. And obviously, if you are a smaller company, you don't have, as you mentioned, the budget for employing a whole team that will be dealing with optimization of rules of origin and what makes sense, what's not from financial point of view. It might be quite challenging to find out what's the best. That's why I think the session we have today is great. So those who are not yet that familiar with this topic can become more familiar, or at least find out where to look for information and how to ensure that they are consolidated. And actually, I will start with one. We received quite a number of questions already from the audience, but I will start with first question, which I wanted to address to Gregory. As you heard from Mariana, in the EU, we started introducing a system called Access to Markets. It's a database that is now static, but will become much more dynamic, which provides consolidated view on on the information you need to know when you plan to export or import. And I was wondering whether in Singapore you have similar database that would combine all the various FTAs and all the information that you need on product-specific basis.
Okay, thank you for the question. In Singapore, we have this, Enterprise Singapore has come up with a system called the Enterprise, the Tariff Finder tool, which is available to the Singapore companies, or those with UEN. They actually can make use of this tool to find out, for example, if a product that goes to EU, or in the context of Singapore, let's say he's sent it to our neighboring countries in ASEAN, can they make use of the ASEAN Atiga or ASEAN India, ASEAN China, or various ASEAN Plus agreement, and see which one has the best rates or best preferential rates and the rules of origin for each product. So in summary, we do have this portal for the use for Singapore companies to use, and as provided by Enterprise Singapore.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will move to some questions which are much more specific, and the first one will be directed to Christoph. So one of the participants asked whether for the determination of origin under Article 2, besides fulfilling wholly obtained or sufficiently processed, does the company need to fulfill other rules such as change of tariff code? Over to you, Christoph.
Thank you for the question. I think part of that question was answered in the presentation of Gregory. So under the sufficiently processed category of products, we have a different type of rules, and you should really go to Annex B and Annex BA to identify what is the specific rule applicable for the concerned product. In particular, there are three types of rules, which are a value added rule, so a maximum amount of non-originating material in the final product, specific production process, which is used for chemical products, for textile products, and change of tariff classification type of rule. And for some of the products, there is a combination of those type of rules, alternatives. So it's not to be considered as a different category. It's part of the sufficiently processed, and it's not applicable for all products. You should really go to Annex B and Annex BA to identify what is the rule. And indeed, there are some agreements where it's simple. It's change of tariff classification for all products, not for EU agreements, but for some other agreements. In this one, it's specific per product, and you should really go there identifying the rule applicable for you.
Thank you very much. We have a question which is somehow linked to this one. So if goods are not wholly obtained or sufficiently produced in Singapore, but other ASEAN countries, say Malaysia, Thailand, can the company enjoy benefits of the EU-Singapore FTA? This question I will direct maybe to Gregory.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think what the question raised concerns the ASEAN accumulation clause. As I mentioned in my slide, and then what I state in public, there has to be some arrangement between EU and Singapore to work out the arrangement on administrative procedures before this ASEAN accumulation clause can be effected, can be utilized. So at the moment, we are talking to a few countries in ASEAN and then with EU. I think at the moment now I have nothing concrete to share, but what we can rest assured the business community is that Singapore is working on that. Singapore is supporting our Ministry of Trade and Industry on this initiative to engage the EUs and the EUs on this. Yeah, so it's still work in progress, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a question about, yes, sorry, go ahead.
May I maybe complement something on that reply?
Sure.
It's not very clear in the question, but it's important to insist that there should be some kind of processing still in Singapore. It's not only that if the goods are fully obtained or sufficiently processed in another ASEAN country, that product will benefit from the preference of the EU-Singapore FTA. There is a condition that the processing in Singapore goes beyond insufficient operations. If not, then the imported materials from Malaysia, Thailand, and other ASEAN countries will not acquire the Singapore origin, and then they will not benefit from the FTA.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will ask a question which actually both of you touched upon. Actually, it's linked to the Asian food quota. So someone is asking whether the exporter can check the balance of the quota. And I think here Christoph already in his presentation provided a link to the database when this can be checked. So we will share this presentation. And then the second part of the question is, will the quota be given only to licensed importers? So this question goes again to Christoph.
This is independent. So if the importer wants to benefit from a quota, there is a specific data element to be provided in the customs declaration, which is the order number of the quota, and there is no other condition linked to the application for using the quota. So this is not related to, I don't see the question actually, but this is not related to a specific license of the exporter. The importer may apply for the quota independently of other elements.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'll move to a more general question to Frank. I was wondering whether, in your view, the importance of the fact that basically Singapore has almost no tariffs impacts on the utilization rate of FTA, because directly, if you look at the exports from third countries to Singapore, majority of the products, if not almost all, are not subjected to tariffs. And as we have heard, only tariffs and not the excise duties are removed. So obviously, when companies export to Singapore, the value of claiming tariff preferences is rather limited, if not zero, if there is no tariff to be saved. So does it play a role? And then many companies use Singapore as a hub, and basically Singapore sometimes appears as the destination of a good, but actually it's not. It's only a destination until it's transshipped somewhere else. So to which extent do you think that the effect of those two elements impacts on the lower utilization rate of FTAs that are with Singapore specifically?
Okay, thanks, Justina. They're great questions that really warrant about an hour and a half worth of reply, but let me try and keep it very tight. So the first question, it's literally a glass half full, glass half empty. There is still some benefit because if you're a beer drinker like me, European beers will come in without customs duty, and that has a knock-on impact. But you're kind of right. From a trade in goods and duty reduction perspective, it's pretty much a one-way street. And it's a one-way street for benefits into the EU, not into Singapore. And this is an agreement that is supposed to be a stepping stone to other agreements with ASEAN member countries that the EU is pursuing, and hopefully at some point in the future an EU-ASEAN wide agreement. Now, clearly also, as we're all well aware, because it took an extra couple of years to get the agreement through, it's not just about trade in goods. I think the benefits for European companies looking at Singapore sit in the services sector, the investment provisions, etc. But in reality, I think 95%, 99% of companies out there that are looking to use FTAs continue to look purely on the trade in goods duty reductions, because that's what they know, that's where they think the benefits are. So in that respect, it is a little bit more of a one-way street. The question around Singapore being a distribution hub, I think, is relevant in a lot of respects. But if you come back to an earlier question, for example, accumulation. So it's interesting. I think as time goes by, this will become more and more important. Right now, and this is coming back to a point I think I made during my presentation, really accumulation is of no practical relevance. Like, it doesn't really exist. I mean, there's only Vietnam that has an FTA with the EU, and even then it's very restricted to which product it's applied to. And actually, like Christoph was already indicating, if you bring in materials from other parts of ASEAN to Singapore, to just combine them, maybe to ship together, or to pick and mix, etc. And you have a possibility of having GSP benefits in the EU, for example, you risk losing that by shipping through Singapore. So I think you need to look very, very carefully right now at what are the requirements and the restrictions. How would sending something physically to Singapore help? Maybe give more flexibility, etc. I think it's more the longer term planning, which so many companies, in my view, are not doing well enough yet. That is important. So structuring, saying, well, in what case do we ship direct? If we don't ship direct, how can we make sure that we don't lose status that helps us in the EU? And that might mean we need a licensed premise in Singapore, or we need to ship through a free zone. Can we mix and match products that are covered by the FTA that we process sufficiently, like Christoph was saying, and other products that we don't, that we ship together, like a machine and its spare parts, and all those kind of things. So maybe not the easy answer you were hoping for, but it is very complex. It offers opportunity, but right now I think there's also a danger that companies are trying to consolidate their supply chains and shoot themselves in the foot.
Thank you very much. And this brings me to the next question, which is actually linked to EU-Vietnam FTA, because this FTA entered into force last August. And actually some companies used Singapore to transship goods to Vietnam. And now before the FTA entered into force, there was no question about tariff preferences, but now there is. And actually some companies are facing a difficulty to comply with the direct shipment rule, and also with the provision that doesn't allow them to perform specific operations in Singapore, because as a result, they might lose their origin. One of the sectors that complained about this is the food and the beverages sector, alcoholic beverages sector. So my question to Christoph is whether there is any space for adjustment of those rules in view of other negotiations of FTAs in the region by the EU.
It is difficult to reply like this. Actually, the text we have in the agreement with Singapore is the text we have in the other agreements, and it would be a deviation from the standard text we use. But why not? We should receive the request from the industry, the association requesting for that change, and we will analyze it. Of course, in the agreement with Vietnam, it should be also discussed with the Vietnamese side, because it's not only us, the EU, establishing the rules, but at the end, the products will be imported in Vietnam, and they should also agree on what is done on the way from the EU to Vietnam. So I will not reply no, I will not reply yes. It has to be analyzed and agreed with the other partner.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one question linked to Vietnam as well from someone from the audience. So it's a very specific question, but I guess the concept is linked to accumulation again. So it's how exactly would the Singapore company accumulate trade in live octopus with Vietnam under the accumulation clause? This is probably too specific in terms of goods, but maybe either Gregory or Christoph could provide an explanation. I believe the rules are not in place, but maybe you can at least provide some general indication.
As I say, on ASEAN accumulation, it's still work in progress. So at this stage, the product, I do not have an answer for you now, because what I see is that the products from Vietnam could be constituted as a originating goods if certain conditions are being met. So for more details, I think it's still too early for Singapore to release to share with you. But once you have the details, I think we will share more in future. So basically, it has to follow the PSR in the EU-Singapore FTA. Yep.
And maybe, Justina, if I may, because that question is actually specific to the EU-Vietnam FTA and not to the EU-Singapore FTA. And it's a accumulation with materials originating in Singapore to be further processed in Vietnam. So to benefit from the preference of the EU-Vietnam FTA. And indeed, accumulation is foreseen for a list of materials to be integrated in a list of products, and the list of possible materials there is a specific annex in which there is the product live octopus mentioned. But again, for the EU-Vietnam FTA, that accumulation is also not enabled because we still need the discussion between the different parties. So it's not enabled yet, and it's related to the EU-Vietnam FTA and not the EU-Singapore FTA.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I move to a more specific question, and it's linked to the following issue. How does the EU-Singapore FTA deal with equipment manufactured in Singapore, which is exported to Europe, but which has a high percentage of components coming from Europe? Is there a specific arrangement for this type of situation? And it's also accumulation, bilateral accumulation, I believe. So I think this question I will direct to Christoph then.
Yes, so this is indeed a question related to bilateral accumulation. That's the basic type of accumulation which we have in all our FTAs, and which enable using materials originating in the other party. So Singapore may use materials originating in the EU, and those materials will be considered as originating in Singapore, and the other way around. In the EU, we may use materials originating in Singapore, which would be considered as originating in the EU. So when you determine the originating status of the final product, you may consider those imported materials from the EU as originating and not as non-originating.
Thank you very much. We have time for, I think, 2 more questions. So one refers to Brexit. So after Brexit, UK negotiated an agreement with Singapore, which actually entered into force at the end of last year, no, actually beginning of this year. And the question is about cumulation. The UK-Singapore FTA allows for cumulation of origin with EU. And the question is whether EU FTA allows for a similar cumulation of components from the UK. This is unfortunately also for Christoph.
Or maybe I will pass the floor to Mariana.
Or Mariana, if Mariana wishes to reply to this one.
Thank you, Christoph, and thank you, Justina. Yes, indeed, with Brexit, the UK left the EU. The UK is not part anymore of the EU's customs territory. Therefore, any materials or processing done in the UK or coming from the UK cannot be considered as originating under the EU-Singapore FTA. So the short reply is no, materials of the UK or processes done in the UK cannot be taken into account for the benefits of EU-Singapore FTA anymore.
Okay, thank you very much for a very clear reply. And I suggest we close with the last one, and this one goes to Frank. So Frank, if you were to make some suggestions how to improve for both Singapore and for the EU, how to improve the rules of origin chapters, or how to improve the future negotiations that we'll have, which suggestions would you make?
Again, you're asking me an hour and a half question to summarize it in half a minute.
Three priorities.
No, that's okay. Now, I think I come back to something that I mentioned, I think, at the end of my my presentation, and just re-emphasize that key point, and maybe even maybe one priority. As you can see from already the discussion we're having here, things that seem quite simple, questions that are being asked that seem quite simple, don't get a direct, straight answer. There's no clear answer. There's still, oh, it depends a little bit on the case, or these things we're still negotiating. I think providing more guidance around those matters of principle, and sharing some of these issues as they're brought up, where they apply to other companies, is one of the, I think, most important steps that we could take. And if you coming back to some of the questions that were raised earlier, right, around accumulation or shipping through Singapore, there is a requirement usually that it needs direct shipment, and if it's indirect shipment, products will need to stay under customs control in the intermediate location. Now, what that means is really subject to various interpretations. So Singapore authorities might say, well, under customs control basically means that you put the products into a licensed warehouse. But the Vietnam authorities may not agree with that. Now, they may have a different rule, or the EU authorities might have a different rule. So getting that level of consistency, or at least for companies to understand what is everybody's view, and therefore how can we make sure that we're doing the right thing, I think is by far, I'd really like to just keep it to that one point, because otherwise I think things go missing. We have to accept there's a lot of ambiguity and misunderstanding. Otherwise, the agreements would be millions of pages thick if you try to deal with every eventuality. But some of those points of principle, I think, are important. There's definitely a sense in the business community often that the authorities that are struggling for revenue sometimes are just looking for excuses not to allow a claim for preferential treatment. And you would say, well, okay, if a product leaves Europe, for example, and it clearly originates under the EU-Vietnam agreement, then why would it make a difference whether it's shipped through Singapore or invoiced through Singapore or Switzerland, etc.? Yes, maybe there's some rules if you worry that a company is doing something fraudulent, but let's at least set the guidelines and tell us what do we need to do. But don't try and change the eligibility of that product after the fact. So I think informed compliance, come back to that term, I think is the way to go to just make sure that people understand and then also feel comfortable using and applying the various agreements, including the EUSFTA.
Thank you very much, Frank, and the other panelists for joining this session. Let's now spend some time discussing how trade facilitation and customs provisions in the EU-Singapore FTA can help business. And we will have two presentations in this session. One from Mr. Liam Bertin from Directorate General for Taxation and Customs Union of the European Commission, and Ms. Angie Deo who is Head of International Relations at Singapore Customs. Lilian, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Justina, and good day to everyone. Listening to the previous panel, it's really clear that rules of origin bring important changes to the life of economic operators who wish to benefit from preferential trade between Singapore and the EU, requiring adaptation and sometimes indeed some complex issues. And the question could be asked about the other customs and trade facilitation related aspects of the agreement, whether some similar changes are brought by the entry into force of the free trade agreement as regards customs procedures. And the short answer would be probably no, not so much. That does not mean that our negotiators lacked ambition in this area. It doesn't mean that these provisions are of lesser importance. What I think this reveals and reflects is the fact that Singapore and the European Union, while being very different entities in size, in their organization, institutions, share some essential principles and beliefs. One about trade facilitation. There are two of the main proponents of trade facilitation measures internationally, and they practice those principles domestically. And they also share belief in the use of modern, advanced customs procedures and tools, and they practice these. And this is reflected in the customs and trade facilitation chapter of our agreement. It translates in a series of commitments and principles that will give some certainty to economic operators. Trade facilitation and customs procedures is always has a dual aspect. It's always a balancing act. facilitating legitimate trade for economic operators, while ensuring the effective and efficient customs controls on our trade flows. And I would underline that there's increased political expectations in the EU that we ensure the compliance, the safety, and the security of our international trade. So how does the chapter allow us to meet this dual objective? I'll just highlight a couple of aspects of the chapter. I know that our colleague from Singapore, Ms. Teo, will detail some of the articles, but let me quote a couple that reflects this common approach. We have language on risk management. That's an important principle that we agree to use. We have a common approach in the agreement to base our respective customs examinations and our release procedures on risk assessment principles. That goes a long way towards facilitating trade for operators. Likewise, in the article on the release of goods, we commit in particular to provide for pre-arrival processing to accelerate the release of goods. Again, that translates very concretely in the fact that release times are very low. Another article I would like to highlight is one referring to simplified customs procedures. It's important, and in the EU free trade agreements, we don't find this this article in all our FTAs, and it's a good development that it was achieved in our discussions with Singapore. Much of the EU customs framework and legislation and procedures is based on the access to simplifications and facilitations for qualified traders. And the commitment in the agreement is to facilitate access to those simplifications for authorized traders. I would also mention, lastly, a strong article and language on the relations with the business community, which could be of interest to our audience today, and solid commitments with regards to the timely consultation of business, the publication of legislation and procedures in advance of their application. And let me finish by highlighting two other aspects of the Customs and Trade Facilitation chapter that also can be of interest. One is about customs cooperation. The FTA allows for the development for the first time of customs cooperation between the European Union and Singapore. And to this day, we did not have that possibility because there was no agreement to base that cooperation. And this cooperation is of interest. It forces some regular exchanges of information on our legislation, including, it's noteworthy, on the border enforcement of intellectual property rights. It opens the way for future joint initiatives. And we have to, it's good that this possibility exists. We know that this free trade agreement is likely to be in existence for probably the next couple of decades. So we cannot foresee exactly what those initiatives will be in 20 years, but that possibility exists. And lastly, more concretely, we have the possibility under this customs cooperation to establish mutual recognition in a number of areas: risk management techniques, risk standards, security controls, and trade partnership programs. This will be developed in our last session today. That's a project we have in the shorter term, and it will be some concrete cooperation work that will go underway very soon. Lastly, I want to mention the fact that these customs and trade facilitation aspects will be dealt with in a dedicated specialized committee. It's called the Committee on Customs, which will look at all customs-related matters, customs and trade facilitation, rules of origin. It will be in charge of organizing the cooperation I just mentioned. It will be in charge of deciding on the mutual recognition mentioned earlier. Its main task, this committee, which will meet regularly, probably on an annual basis, will be to ensure the proper functioning of all customs-related aspects of the free trade agreement. And I'll mention it because we're eager to receive input and feedback from the business community, which has the practical experience of the implementation of the FTA. Several channels are available to convey related messages in Brussels, in directly to us or through consultative bodies, and also through the EU delegation in Singapore, which is hosting this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian, for your presentation. And now I will turn to Ms. Angie Teo to present Singapore's point of view.
Yep. Thank you, Justina. So hello, everyone. I'm Angie from Customs. I take care of the International Relations branch of Singapore Customs. And we are also the same bunch of people who negotiate the customs procedures and trade facilitation chapters in the free trade agreements. Thanks, Lillian, for the brief descriptions on some of the items. So that will leave me to maybe touch on a little bit of the details of some of the chapters. So what we'll cover today is I'll explain a little bit on the WTO TFA, because that is the basis of which we worked off some of our articles in the EU-Singapore FTA. Then I'll touch on the customs procedures and trade facilitation articles proper, which will be followed by some key elements and benefits from some of these articles. And finally, a very brief description of how we actually enhance our partnership with trade over here in Singapore. So just to give a bit of a background, the WTO TFA was concluded in December 2013. It is a binding agreement. I think many of you here today would know, and it entered into force on the 22nd of February. As of 3rd of May this year, 93.9% or out of, that means 93.9% of countries have actually ratified the TFA. And what is the commitment behind the TFA is that we want to tackle some of the barriers to trade, which is posed by the burdensome border requirements. And our commitment is to reduce the red tape at the borders, as well as increase transparency and efficiency. So you'll see some of this being touched on in the key elements of the FTA in a while. So as I said earlier, we negotiate the CPTF chapter, also known by other titles like Customs Administration or Customs Procedures. It is usually a subset of the Trade in Goods chapter. We secure preferential advantages for goods exported from Singapore. And of course, for us, we will implement the commitments and provisions in the chapter and enforce any kind of applicable violations under our domestic laws, be it incorrect declarations, falsified documents. So the chapter itself actually addresses a few key principles that in fact, sometimes it might not be that clear that it can be very critical for businesses, but it is important if you do want to do business or to set up businesses in the EU countries, EU member states, or even in Singapore. So some of the key principles that we address, are simplification, harmonization, previous slide, sorry, my apologies. So yeah. And also modernization of trade procedures. So the objective is to eventually to reduce transaction costs at the interface between businesses and customs administrations. And of course, at the end of it, what we want to do is to expedite movement and to release and clear goods as fast as possible if they are legitimate. So these are some of the key elements. As you can see, we will always start off with the CPTF chapter with effective communication and transparency. That is because communication forms the basis of how you can comply with some of the rules and regulations and how do you enjoy some of the benefits under the FTA. I think this is quite related to what Frank had said earlier about how compliance can only come about if you have the information on how to comply. So some of these things actually lies in the essence of the chapters or articles on transparency and effective communication. Of course, we also have articles on advanced rulings, release of goods, single window, risk management, simplified customs procedures, as well as IPR. I will touch on some of these key elements in the next few slides. So in terms of transparency and effective communication, what we have put inside the article is that we dictate that there should be a reasonable time period between the publication of a new legislation and customs procedures and the entry into force. This is to allow the businesses to be able to react and to change if they need to change anything to their regulations or to factor in some of the compliance requirements. We have also put in place the need to publicize information on fees and charges. I think that is important because this is part of business costs and it's important for businesses to know what are the possible fees and charges they have to pay, and the need to consult with business communities to allow them to comment and be part of the process of formulating legislative procedures and proposals related to customs procedures. In terms of advanced rulings in this particular article, what we have asked for is greater certainty for companies and for the coverage to include origin and tariff classification. What is not inside is valuation. So for now, it only covers the AR advanced ruling on origin and tariff classification. In terms of release of goods, again, we have committed to the expeditious release of goods and to have simplified requirements. That includes advanced electronic submission to enable the release of goods on arrival. Again, this might be quite natural for businesses who are located here in Singapore, because we do have a single window that allows for the quick submission of advanced electronic declaration and for the permits to be submitted through a single window. So again, that is what we want to have under the entire EU-Singapore FTA, to have such an electronic submission requirement. And I must say that COVID-19 has actually helped to expedite the such an advanced electronic submission, such an initiative, because some of the countries might not see the need to have paperless trading, or to actually be able to allow businesses to declare their declarations electronically. But COVID-19, with the emphasis on reducing physical interaction, has actually expedited and catalyzed the process of going paperless. Which comes to my next point in the next article. We have also committed to facilitate electronic submission of information and to only allow a single submission of information. That includes fulfilling the obligations of the competent authorities. And for Singapore, we have also launched the Network Trade Platform in September 2018, which continues to be an enhanced version of our TradeNet, where we provide a one-stop shop for trade and logistics ecosystem to facilitate cross-border paperless trade. Yeah. The other three articles that I would roughly touch on are risk management. Of course, with good risk management, that means legitimate goods will be cleared faster, and we will only target the high-risk goods for more intrusive inspections. Simplified customs procedures. We want to reduce costs and make it very predictable for operators to operate within Singapore and the EU. So one of which is to push for a single customs declaration document. And finally, we also want to promote IPR. So we also have articles that dictate some of the border enforcement of the IPR regarding import, export, and transit goods. Yeah. So in my last two slides, I'll just very quickly run through. For Singapore, what we do in terms of enhancing our partnership with trade is to identify emerging areas that is required for us to customize our facilitation for businesses. So this can be done through even a seminar or webinar like that. We also have frequent outreach with our business, our Singapore Business Federation, where we try and get feedback from our traders and businesses. Even for initiatives that we have already implemented, we will continuously look at it to make sure that it's relevant. We also partner our trading community to enhance supply chain security. So that also includes working with them through our account managers to also find out what are some of their pain points and how we can help them to comply with our regulations. Because if they are very aware of what they need to do, then that will cut down costs actually for both sides. Then we don't have to go after them to comply, and they know what to do, and it's a win-win for both. So we are very particular about this aspect of promoting our partnership with trade. And finally, like in this webinar, we try to promote the use of free trade agreements so that our companies know where can they gain a competitive advantage in terms of market access. These are our engagement channels. I think this is quite well known. It's pretty easy to reach out to us. Of course, I do take in the earlier polls that says that I think about 50% have said that it might not be so easy to locate information on customs procedures. We are always looking at ways that we can improve our websites and to make it more user-friendly and for information to be clearer. So we will welcome any feedback that you have on how we can actually go about improving layout or the user experience on our website and all our different channels of communication. So that is my last slide. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Now we have a couple of minutes for a Q&A, and we received some questions from the audience. So the first one will go to Lilian, and is the following. The EU has a growing focus on sustainability with the adoption of European Green Deal and Circular Economy Action Plan. The question is whether additional standards will be imposed, such as the carbon border adjustment mechanism on exports to the EU.
Thank you. This is indeed pointing to an area of intense activity at the moment. A reference is made to the CBAM, carbon adjustment mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism. There's a commitment made by the EU to discuss a proposal that the European Commission is currently preparing. We are currently reflecting and evaluating this proposal to avoid the so-called carbon leakage. We do have a system of emissions trading schemes in the EU to answer the challenge of the risk of carbon leakage at the border. We are going to propose a mechanism to address this. Such proposal is in preparation and is expected to be put forward in July, in mid-July at the moment. It will open up a discussion among EU institutions, the Council and the Parliament, with a view to adopting a CBAM measure.
Okay, thank you for providing this insight. And now I have a question for Ms. Teo. So how does the advanced ruling work? You mentioned it in your presentation, and one member of the audience would like to know more about it.
Okay, so the term advanced ruling basically says that you will know what is our ruling on certain things in advance. So for example, when we talk about advanced ruling for origin, we will give you a ruling, that means a decision by customs to tell you where your goods are originating from. In advance, it could be 30 days, 90 days in advance. So we do have some service standards. Or if it is about classification, the same thing. We will tell you what is our decision on how we have classified this product. And that same ruling can then be used to declare your permit, and there will be a time frame, for example, 3 to 5 years, where that ruling will continue to stand. So this actually reduces the need for the companies to go to customs to ask for a ruling each time they need to bring their goods into a country or out of Singapore. So that is what is meant by advanced ruling.
Okay. And someone else asked whether such rulings are confidential or they are available to everyone.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Such rulings?
Whether advanced
yeah.
rulings are confidential or they are individual, so they are only communicated to the parties involved.
Yes, it is only communicated to the parties involved. It is confidential. So we do,
Okay.
but for the interest of the businesses, we do publish with permission some of the old rulings that we have. It's like for example, if you were to bring in this was our past decision that was made. So we do have something like that is published, but But most of it, I would say, is confidential. It can only be shared if the company gives us permission to have it shared publicly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I have actually a question to Lilian. It's also about advanced ruling, but it's the participant asked whether we could confirm that the importing authority has to confirm the advanced ruling, and in that case, for the EU, who is the importing authority?
The importing authority, that's a terminology I will have to check. If I may complement or complete the answer on advanced rulings and confirm that the EU is operating under a similar setting as NG just described for Singapore. Regarding the availability of advanced rulings, they indeed cover both the classification and origin issues. The timelines for their adoption when you apply for an advanced ruling are 120 days in the EU. I think that's a bit more than what Singapore can offer. But there's a reason also for that. There's a need for EU customs authorities to coordinate in the issuance of their advanced rulings. We absolutely need a uniform approach in this regard. And regarding the publication of those advanced rulings, we don't publish them per se. We extract the relevant information and put that information in a database that is publicly available. Of course, keeping confidential business information aside and not allowing the identification of a specific products, but giving information that could be of help to all operators.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are running out of time for this Q&A, so thank you very much for replying to the questions. And now we will be moving on to our final session. During this session, we will examine the concept of authorized economic operators and how this concept facilitates bilateral trade. And I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Marcel Vinagers from Directorate General for Taxation and Customs Union at the European Commission, and Mr. Tan Minh Ho from Singapore Customs. Please be sure to type in your questions, so at the end of the two presentations, we can reply to them. Marcel, could we have your perspective, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Justina. Yeah, first of all, good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Yeah, I would like to share a presentation and explain a bit more about the EU Authorized Economic Operator Program, and also some information about the mutual recognition agreements that EU has signed, and also some future arrangements. First, some facts. I think that's a more practical approach based on the safe framework of standards of the World Customs Organization, where a lot of requirements are included. And also we see in this WCO that the AO is also recognized as a global customs quality standard, what we see more and more. For the EU, the program is fully operational since January 2008, so already a couple of years, and recognized. So an AO authorization is recognized in all the current 27 EU member states, so throughout the EU. There is a legal base for the AO program. It is in the European Customs Code, in the Implementing Act and Delegated Act. So articles referring to criteria and all requirements involved. And additionally, there are the EU AO guidelines, currently version 6, in which this legislation is more explained and more explained in detail. This version will also be updated this year, but I'll come back to that. Yeah, it's open to all international supply chain actors in the EU. So that means the entire supply chain, so that crosses the EU border. That means importers, exporters, operators, trucking companies, you name it. The validity of as soon as an AO authorization is issued, in principle, it's an unlimited validity, but there is a robust monitoring involved. This monitoring means that we expect companies to monitor themselves, that they still meet the criteria, but also from customs point of view. that there will be checks if companies still fulfill the criteria. Well, we're talking about currently about 18,000 AO authorizations valid in the 27 EU member states. And it roughly covers 77% of import and 77% of export. So that means that an AO authorization holder is part of this import or export procedures. In the EU, we have two types of authorizations. One is the AO security authorization with security requirements, of course. And there's a specific one on the AOC, custom simplifications. And a lot of companies have decided to go for the both types of authorization. And that's, I think it's roughly half of the 18,000 that have a combined authorization. Yeah, on the next slide, this is the overall view, put it all together. Just a quick feedback. It's the conditions and criteria are on the left side. So the main parts are, yeah, the compliance criterion is very important. Record keeping, financial solvency, very actual at the moment due to the yeah, the COVID-19 crisis. That some companies might face some problems with this. And for the AOC, there's also a specific requirement on the competency and qualification. So that means practical knowledge of actually doing declarations, so customs knowledge. On the AOS side, specifically on the safety security, we see all the benefits are also there. The main are the fewer controls. So that means lower control rates for the trade, for the AO companies. And the so-called logistic benefits, that I mean the prior notification, priority treatment, request for another place of control. And they mainly mean to speed up the logistic process so that companies know when they will be selected for control, that they have a prior notification so they can plan their operations better. And also priority treatment, which will speed up the whole procedure, of course. Also important are the indirect benefits, not in legislation, but I specifically would like to refer specifically for the companies involved. We hear a lot of input from companies that see indirect benefits, specifically on the commercial point of view, because as I mentioned, the AEO certificate is kind of considered as a customs quality standard. And when companies actually get this AEO certification, that they can generate more business even by showing this quality standard, or that other companies know that we're dealing with a trusted partner. Yeah, next, about the mutual recognition, which is basically on security part. This is also a benefit, which is a bit broader, of course. Yeah, on the next slide, we can see the current mutual recognition. Let's go back to that one. Let's go back to the main focus at this moment from the EU. No, next slide, please. That the main focus of the current EU program is further strengthening the sustainability of the EU program. I'll mention the security and compliance, and then specifically referring to the e-commerce context, because as I think many people know, that this has been growing enormously the last couple of years, and there's a special focus on also on monitoring. And also part of the regular update of the guidelines, this will include more specific information on how to monitor those specific business models. An important part is the further cooperation with other government authorities, also related to security elements. Specifically, I would like to refer to the air cargo security requirements, which is in the EU legislation, a direct link now. When companies are exporting air cargo security, they also need security certification. In the EU, this is a direct link now with the AEOS authorization. So this is one of the examples that further cooperation is also an important part. And yeah, coming back to the mutual recognition of AEO programs, this is also a boost which gives extra benefits to companies involved. Now on the next slide, there's an overview, a brief overview of the current mutual recognition agreements. It's the other AEO programs or AEO-like programs. I'd like to refer to the CTPAT program of the United States. Currently, we have the AEO program with Japan and the AEO program with China. And the PIP program, Partners in Protection of Canada, is at the moment being negotiated, but in principle in final stages of conclusion. Yeah, there are a few more which were concluded. On the next slide, you can see an overview of the dates involved. So also Switzerland and Norway were the first two with security arrangements. And yeah, recently the EU signed with the United Kingdom the mutual recognition on AEO. And yeah, as you know, the ongoing negotiations with Canada are ongoing, and of course with Singapore and with Moldova. On the next slide, you can see basically the requirements of the EU. There has to be a comparable legal base, and also the practical comparison and assessment of implementation of both programs will be part of the comparison. And in principle, with Singapore, we are in the first two stages of this process. And yeah, looking forward to the next stage, specifically on the on-site company visits, which is currently a bit of a challenge due to the COVID-19 situation. But together with our Singapore colleagues, we try to find a solution to see what we can do online. But this is still ongoing, as I mentioned. There will be a part on the detailed MRA text, which will include specifics on benefits, information exchange, security, yeah, you name it, all the details that will be shared. And last but not least, it's an important part, the electronic data exchange system, which is very important to recognize each other's AEO companies, or in the case of Singapore, the secure trade partners. And on the last slide, you can see the benefits. Additionally, for the partners of the AEO programs, there will be even fewer security and safety related controls. This will be on top of the other controls for AEOs in the EU. So in principle, the more AEO companies or AEO-like companies involved in this supply chain, the lower the risk targeting procedures will score, so the lower the controls. Important part is the recognition of business partners during the application process. This is also will be taken into account. Priority treatment at customs clearance, also logistical benefit, and a business continuity mechanism. This means that in case of disruptions, logistic flow, or calamities, that there will be a specific mechanism to prioritize treatment of AEO companies. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you as well. Thank you, Marcel, for sharing your point of view. And now I would like to invite Mr. Tan to explain the Singapore's system.
Yeah, sure. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ming Ho. I'm from the Trade Strategy and Security branch of Singapore Customs. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to do a brief run through of Singapore's AEO program, the STP, for Secure Trade Partnership, how it materialized, as well as the benefits that it can bring to our traders. So our STP journey began in 2005 when we signed the letter of intent to implement WCO's Safe Framework of Standards. 2 years later, we launched our national AEO program, the STP. And in 2008, we introduced the higher tiered STP Plus. And to date, we have concluded a total of 10 MRAs with 10 other nations. And I think we have on board around 110 STP companies and around 80 plus STP Plus companies. So the STP is essentially a voluntary and partnership program that is open to all stakeholders along the supply chain. So we really hope that people, that companies will voluntarily come forward and join us so that we can ensure supply chain security and facilitate legitimate trade. The objectives of STP is fairly straightforward. We really wish to create awareness of the importance of adopting a total supply chain approach to cargo security, and to encourage companies to play their part in securing their own processes. And of course, to enhance the security of global supply chain and profile Singapore as a secure trading hub. So the STP really encourages companies to adopt and implement security measures to mitigate the risk and vulnerabilities that they currently have. So the STP program will look at these few security elements. It ranges from premises security, personnel security, business partner, cargo, conveyance, IT security, to incident management and investigations, and crisis management and incident recovery. So upon application for STP or STP Plus, the company will have to go through Singapore Customs Trade First Assessment Framework, which stands for Trade Facilitation and Integrated Risk-Based System. So it is essentially a single set of assessment criteria that we will use to assess all applications for schemes, programs, and facilitations that are offered by Singapore Customs, so that it allows us to have a comprehensive understanding of the company and also to better meet their needs. So when a company applies for STP, they'll need to go through Trade First, and we will look at these 6 broad assessment categories. We'll look at the company's profile, their inventory management and controls, their compliance levels, procedures and processes that they have in place, and the security. So these 6 broad assessment categories are incorporated into a single set of assessment criteria, which we will then use to grade and band the companies, band as in B-A-N-D. Yep, so from the photo on the left, this is what I meant when I say the companies are banded. It ranges from basic to premium, depending on how robust the company's systems are. So of course, the higher up you go, the more facilitation, the more schemes the company will be eligible for. So if your company is in the intermediate band or above and have met some or most of the mandatory criteria under STP, you will be accorded STP certification. And only if you're in the premium band and have met all mandatory criteria under STP, then you'll be accorded STP Plus certification. So the STP program is really not designed to replace or supersede the company's existing supply chain security systems, but rather to leverage on them and work with Singapore Customs to improve the total supply chain security. So what are the benefits that the STP can bring to your company? For starters, you'll get reduced risk scoring in terms of domestic facilitation. And for STP Plus companies, you also enjoy overseas facilitation under our MRA partners. I'll touch on that a bit later. And companies will also enjoy faster clearance of cargo in the event of trade disruption and reduce compliance costs. And you have a dedicated account manager so that you can raise any customs issues with him or her. And you get to use our STP logo as part of your enhanced branding. Yep, so this is what I meant. Companies certified STP or STP Plus, they'll get to use the STP logo to enhance their branding as an indication of their good security measures and compliance records. And we hope that this can improve business opportunities as well. So the STP certification is valid for 3 years, after which you'll be due for renewal. Of course, there are also certain terms and conditions that companies will have to abide by during the period of certification. If found guilty of not abiding by any of these T's and C's, your certification will be revoked or suspended. So really, the STP is a free comprehensive tool that you can use to assess various aspects of your company's supply chain. And you can also look at your company's supply chain from a new perspective. And of course, it improves your company's supply chain efficiencies. So just now, I touched on how our STP Plus companies enjoy overseas facilitation under our MRA partners. So MRA, Mutual Recognition Arrangement, so it essentially means that customs administrations between 2 nations, we recognize each other's supply chain security programs as well as customs control. So if the 2 parties have a network of MRAs, a vast network of MRAs, it will offer a more holistic approach in strengthening trade security across the global supply chain. So for instance, let's take the EU-Singapore AU MRA that we have under negotiation. For example, so under this MRA, Singapore Customs STP Plus companies will be recognized as being of lower risk in the EU, and EU's AEOs will be recognized as lower risk in Singapore. So for exporters, their goods will have a lower chance of customs intervention, leading to quicker release of goods at importation. And during trade disruption, you can also expect cargo from certified companies, SCP, SCP+, to be cleared ahead of others when trade resumes. Yep, so this is my last slide. This is a list of Singapore's existing MRAs that we have signed since the inception of this program. And we are really hoping that we can add the EU one soon. Yeah, that's the last slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I will start with one question actually addressed to both of you. I don't know whether you can comment much, but would you want to comment on the timeline for the negotiation of the MRA? I guess it can provide many benefits to business, but you both mentioned it, but you didn't provide any timeline. Can you stipulate on this maybe?
Well, actually, we have been working very closely with Mr. Nagas on this, I think since last year, or since I think late 2019. By right, we are given 2 years to complete this, but of course, the COVID-19 situation has put a standstill to the joint validations. We can't visit EU can't visit us due to travel restrictions. But no worries, we have a fair amount of meetings coming up, and we can further discuss with EU on this.
Yeah,
and,
maybe I can.
Another question. Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I can add something. It's indeed, yeah, as I explained in the presentation, the steps are already made. So the first 2 phases are already done. But yeah, for the travel restrictions, it's part of the whole plan is an on-site visit. So that means EU team visits Singapore to see more the practical approach and security measures, and also the other way around, that Singapore team visits 1 or 2 EU countries to see the practical approach. But everything that can be done online and from the distance of all the kilometers between us, that can be done online, we're doing it. So a comparison is done. With the next step will be some online meeting to discuss further, to ask some questions and get some detailed information. But we hope to that all the travel restrictions after summer, the best case scenario, will be lifted. Everybody gets the vaccines, and that we can get more operational approach. So, thank you.
Let's hope so. Actually, I have another question from the audience about practical aspects of MRA. Someone's asking how MRA works in practice. Is it through system transmitting information from exporting customs to importing customs, or how does it work? Would you want to elaborate? I guess this question could be answered by both of you, so whoever takes the floor first.
Okay, I'll start first. In Singapore's case, when SCP Plus companies declares a permit, they can declare their AO codes in the export permits, and we will transmit this data on a monthly basis. At least that's what we do for our current MRA partners. We will transmit our list of AEOs to our MRA partners, the latest updated ones, and likewise, our MRA partners will transmit electronically their list of updated AO companies to Singapore, and that's how we do facilitation. We will recognize each other's AO company codes, and from there we know that this cargo declared by this permit with this AO code is of lower risk and you'll be granted facilitated clearance.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't have much. Yeah, to be honest, I don't have much to add, because as is mutual, we have the same approach, of course. But as to emphasize that it's the basic trigger is the unique number of an AO company, also from MRA partners, and this unique number has to be included in the customs declarations, which is directly linked to the risk targeting systems, where companies can get a lower risk score. So. Maybe it's good to emphasize the importance of using these identifiers, because in practice with the current MRAs, sometimes we see that companies that they don't actually use this number in the declarations, and this is a kind of a problem, because companies can get the benefits, but they cannot be recognized through the systems. So, but this is the system that basically is. The same. I think it's in all mutual recognitions that it is information exchange, and through declaration codes they can be recognized. So.
Okay, I have another question which is linked to, which is actually for Marcel, and it is about whether you could explain the regime of economic operators registration and identification number, and whether Singapore companies have to obtain this number to export to the EU.
Yeah, that's for short the EORI number. I just
exactly.
mentioned.
Yes, this is
that makes it easier. That what I just explained, that every EU company has a unique identifier. This is actually the EORI number. So it stands for registration identification number. So every company based in the EU dealing with customs has to have a EORI number. And this number is directly linked, for example, with an AO authorization. So that's how they can be recognized. If an exporter from Singapore or another country is importing in the EU, in principle, they have to deal with an operator in the EU that can make the declaration for them. So that will be a declarant or an intermediary that will use this. So a Singapore operator cannot apply for an EORI number because it's only for EU-based companies, and so they have to work together with business partners. But as I explained earlier, for the mutual recognition, the number, but that will be part of the information exchange of identifiers between the EU and Singapore, for example. There will be an information exchange of these unique identifiers of both parties to recognize each other in declaration systems. So I hope this clarifies it more.
Yes, thank you very much. It clarifies, yes, indeed. So this was the issue of abbreviation. So now I think it's clear that Singaporean exporters do not apply directly. They have to find a partner. So like this, they will be able to export. And actually, we have time for one question more. So this is a question to Mr. Tan, whether he could update us on the status of the Asean AEO Mutual Recognition Agreement, and whether it could benefit in the longer term exports from Asean to the EU.
Okay, for the ASEAN AEO MRA, likewise, we are in the process of conducting our assessment on the respective ASEAN member states AEO programs, and that is expected to take some time because there are 10 countries, so we have to assess 10 countries' AEO programs, and due to COVID-19, well, likewise with the EU AEO program, we have to postpone our planned on-site joint validation visits. So, regardless, we are still working on formulating a draft AEO MRI text, doing whatever we can online first, and pushing back the joint validations at the moment. And for the second part of your question, yes, if the ASEAN AEO MRA can reduce the regulatory burden actually on international trade, because it ensures that AEO shipments from ASEAN, they're aligned to the WTO Safe Framework of Standards, and it provides an opportunity for ASEAN companies to negotiate with external parties such as the EU as a bloc, and to further strengthen our cooperation in international trade. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you for this short but very relevant Q&A. And this brings our seminar to a close. I would like to thank all of our speakers today for their participation and for sharing their insightful perspectives. We hope this webinar was useful for your business and provided practical explanations on how customs trade facilitation and rules of origin provisions work and can benefit business operators. Thank you for the audience as well and for your active participation. You have submitted many questions. So I hope you will join us as well for future webinars that we'll have on other topics. As mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing the full recording of this session on our YouTube channel, which is EU in Singapore. And we will be also uploading all the presentations. Some actually will be even more detailed than what we managed to present today on our website, which is www.europa.sg. In addition to that, you will also receive an email with the links. So you will be able to follow if it was quite fast today, because I acknowledge we had quite a many issues to cover. But I hope that you really benefited from it. And in case of further questions, you can also reach out to us, to the EU delegation in Singapore, or to our colleagues in Brussels or here in Singapore. So thank you very much again for joining. And we will be happy to welcome you at our next webinar. We will be updating the schedule for the next webinar on our website. In the meantime, keep safe. Thank you very much.